On my wedding anniversary, my husband took his mistress to Paris and left me a note. Take care of the dog. On the day I was preparing a special dinner to celebrate 15 years of marriage, I received the biggest blow of my life. Instead of flowers or a romantic surprise, I found a dry note and a deafening silence. While I dreamed of a special night, he was boarding a flight to Paris with another woman. All I was left with was the dog and a completely broken heart. But what seemed like the end turned out to be the beginning of an unexpected journey. A story of pain, yes, but also of courage, discoveries, and rebirth. I had to rebuild myself from scratch, face truths I never wanted to see, and discover that, behind the abandonment, there was a strength within me I never imagined I possessed. Today, I look back with pride at the woman I've become. I'm so happy to have you here. Follow my story to the end and comment on the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. The aroma of tomato and basil sauce filled the kitchen as I finalized the last details of dinner. The wine was already open, breathing in the glass, and dessert rested in the refrigerator like a sweet promise of a special night. The table was set with the porcelain dinnerware we only used on important occasions. I wore my favorite navy blue dress, the same one from our honeymoon. My heart pounded with anticipation. 15 years of marriage deserved to be celebrated with affection. I remembered every detail of our story as I stirred the sauce. The sleepless nights in our first home, the knowing smiles after silly arguments, the plans made on the porch on Sunday afternoons. Timothy had worked late in recent days, but he always remembered. He always arrived with flowers or a loving gesture. I believed this with all my might as I prepared every part of that dinner. It was the least love deserved. Dedication, hope, surrender. I put on some soft music and went to the bedroom to get the candle we always lit on our wedding anniversaries. I smiled to myself, already anticipating his surprised look. I wanted him to feel loved, remembered, valued. It was almost 7:30. He never stayed out past 8. The dog, little Bruno, slept curled up at the foot of the sofa, oblivious to the tension that squeezed my chest. I took a deep breath and went upstairs to the bedroom, still believing in the best. When I opened the bedroom door, I saw only an envelope on the bed. My hands hesitated before touching the paper. There was something strange about it. No gift. No clothes tossed around. The silence was deeper than usual. I opened the envelope with a pounding heart, still clinging to the illusion that it would be some romantic letter. But 3 words were enough for the floor to disappear beneath my feet. Take care of the dog. No explanation, no affection. Just that. Just abandonment. The pain came first as an emptiness. A silence that screamed inside me louder than any cry. I sat on the edge of the bed with the paper between my fingers, trying to understand what was happening. My eyes scanned his hasty handwriting, as if more words would appear out of nowhere, as if there were a second page with some relief. But there wasn't. That was it. He was gone. Without looking back. Without thinking of me. I got up, stunned, and walked through the house like someone searching for a forgotten dream. His shoes were gone. His toothbrush too. The only thing he left, besides the note, was the full dog food bowl and Bruno's collar hanging on the doorknob. That was all. Timothy was no more. Just an echo of what was. Just a brutal absence. I leaned against the wall and slid to the floor, hugging my knees. I tried not to make a sound, tried not to cry loudly. As if I stayed quiet enough, he would come back through the door with some excuse. But I knew. Deep down I already knew. He was gone. And he didn't even take the dog. The clock struck midnight when I managed to move. The house was plunged into darkness, and so was I. I walked downstairs slowly, trying not to wake the silence, as if it were a living presence that could suffocate me. Bruno looked at me confused, as if he felt my pain. I curled up on the sofa with him in my arms, seeking any warmth that remained. The world outside seemed distant, irrelevant. The only reality was that emptiness inside me. Tears flowed effortlessly. They weren't sobs or noisy desperation. It was a cry that came from a deep, almost ancestral place. I wondered what the next day would be like. How would I explain to myself that everything I had built in 15 years had collapsed in one night? There was no answer. Only questions echoing, hitting the walls like faceless ghosts. Bruno nudged his nose against my leg and let out a sad sigh. He too had been left behind. It was as if he knew something had changed forever. The shared pain between us made me feel less alone. I gently stroked his ears, trying to find there some of the love I lacked. The night seemed endless. Every minute was an eternity. The past paraded before my eyes. Laughter, trips, dinners, promises, and now silence. It was as if each memory cut me inside, but at the same time kept me alive. I was still breathing, still existing, even broken. And maybe, just maybe, this was a beginning. I didn't know it yet, but that abandonment would be the beginning of my rebirth. The next day, still dizzy from a sleepless night, I was surprised by a knock at the door. It was Joshua, my old friend from youth. As soon as he saw me, his eyes filled with concern. I didn't need to say anything. The state of the house, the table still set, and the dog sleeping at my feet were enough. He came in silently, sat beside me, and just held my hand. For the first time, I cried in front of someone. Joshua listened in silence as I told him, with pauses and tears, everything that had happened. When I mentioned the note, I saw something change in his expression. He leaned back on the sofa and closed his eyes as if trying to contain his own anger. I asked what was wrong, but he hesitated. That's when he got up and started pacing the room, restless, tense, as if holding on to an old truth. "This doesn't seem like a sudden decision, Catherine," he finally said. "Men like that plan their escape long before they jump." I shook my head, refusing the idea that Timothy was capable of something so cruel for so long. But Joshua didn't seem surprised by anything. There was more beneath that surface of indignation. And he knew. "Do you think this just started now?" Joshua's sentence pierced me like a splinter. He spoke with knowledge, not just supposition. My heart refused to accept it, but my mind began to connect uncomfortable dots. I confronted him with my gaze, asking for an explanation. He took a deep breath and then told me that, more than 2 years ago, he had heard rumors about Timothy with other women. He never wanted to hurt me, so he kept quiet. At first, my reaction was to deny it. Timothy was imperfect, yes, but not a serial liar. However, as Joshua spoke, old memories returned with another meaning. Unexpected trips, mood swings, deleted messages. How did I not see it? Or did I see it and prefer to pretend I didn't? Denial gave way to a more mature pain, the pain of recognition. I felt foolish. Not just betrayed, but deceived by myself for having trusted so much. Joshua tried to comfort me, but it was too late. Reality had already penetrated my armor. I sat there in silence, digesting each revelation as one chews on shards of glass. The betrayal wasn't from yesterday. It was long hidden, and had roots in fertile ground of lies. All of it had lasted longer than I imagined. That night, after Joshua left, I sat with a notebook on my lap. Something inside me had changed. I no longer just wanted to survive the pain. I wanted to understand how it had all happened. I started writing down dates, events, suspicious trips, poorly explained phrases. Each detail was a piece in a puzzle that little by little took shape. And the figure that emerged was terribly clear. I rummaged through mailboxes, old bank accounts, invoices forgotten in the back of a drawer. Nothing more would go unnoticed. I felt an impulse that hadn't visited me in a long time, the desire to act, to take control even with my heart in pieces. Crying in the dark was no longer enough. It was time to turn on the light, no matter how painful it was. Bruno followed me everywhere, as if he sensed I needed company. Sometimes he would rest his head on my lap as if to say, "It's going to be okay." I didn't know if it would be, but I knew that, at that moment, I would no longer be the woman waiting for apologies. I would be the one seeking truths, no matter who it hurt. If he thought I would cry forever, he didn't know me anymore. I spent the following days immersed in papers, statements, and old passwords that Timothy never imagined I would remember. The more I dug, the more my indignation grew. There were withdrawals made at improbable times, transfers to unknown accounts, and purchases that never happened in our name. It was like opening a wound and finding in it a well of carefully hidden rot. Everything screamed betrayal, but now financial. I spent hours analyzing patterns, cross-referencing dates with his absences. Every penny seemed to tell a story of deception, until I found a large transaction made 6 months ago that chilled me to the bone. It was a considerable amount withdrawn from our joint account and sent to an account that apparently was in the name of a company. I started noting everything methodically. For the first time, my pain had turned into an investigation. I called the bank manager. He was evasive at first, but given my insistence and the account's history, he let slip that the transfer was for a down payment on a property, an apartment abroad. The address was in Paris. I felt my stomach churn. Timothy had not only betrayed me, he had financed that escape with what was ours. Those amounts were from the joint account. I took a deep breath and delved into the inheritance folders I had received 2 years earlier, after my father's death. At the time, Timothy insisted on putting the money into the joint account, claiming we were one person. And I, as always, trusted him. Now every line of that statement screamed the truth that had escaped me. He had used my past, my grief, my love, to secure a new life with another woman. When I confirmed that the Paris apartment was registered in the name of a company linked to Christine, something inside me completely broke. Her. The woman who occupied the place that was once mine. Who slept in sheets paid for with what my father left me. The anger that came was not destructive, but cold, lucid, fierce. I needed to react. I understood that this war would not just be emotional. It was also legal material. Timothy had crossed all boundaries. He not only abandoned me, he stole what was rightfully mine. The woman he left behind was no longer the same. Now I had motive, proof, and fire in my eyes. He used my past to fund their future. The next day, I scheduled a meeting with a lawyer recommended by Deborah, my coworker. Her name was Luciana Torres, and she greeted me with a firm yet sensitive look, something rare to find in the legal field. I told her everything, from the note to the apartment. She listened attentively and at the end, said the phrase that shifted my axis. "You have a strong case and he will have to answer for it." I left the office with a folder full of guidance and an initial plan. Luciana would prepare the asset freeze process and request the lifting of Christine's company's secrecy. I needed more documents, more evidence, but now I was no longer alone. Justice, though slow, was beginning to align with me. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flash of power. I walked home with firm steps. There was still pain, there were still nights of silence, but now there was also direction. What Timothy had tried to destroy was rebuilding itself, inch by inch. I knew the road would be long, that there would be falls along the way. But I had taken the first step, and that was all that mattered. I might have lost a husband, but I could still regain my dignity. I received the call on a cloudy Tuesday. The voice on the other end was deep, paused, with a slight tone of tension. "My name is Jason Baker. We need to talk." Took me a few seconds to connect. Jason. Christine's brother. The brother of the woman who had destroyed my life. My instinct was to hang up, but something in his voice held me. We agreed to meet at a discreet cafe. I went with caution and a guarded heart. As soon as I saw him, I felt a strange mix of familiarity and distrust. He introduced himself with a firm handshake and eyes that didn't avoid mine. There was no arrogance there, just something contained, as if every word was carefully measured. He began by saying he didn't support what Christine had done. That was already surprising. Then he delivered the sentence that made me straighten in my chair. "I'm not here to defend my sister." Jason seemed to know more than he let on. His questions were sharp, and his comments let slip fragments of hidden truths. He knew about the apartment, the transactions, even the note Timothy had left. This was not a casual visit. It was an offer. But why? What would he gain from it? "I'm not here to defend my sister." It was then that he opened the folder he had brought with him. He placed documents on the table, screenshots of emails, suspicious financial transactions, all linked to Christine's name. Some signatures were fake. Others involved shell companies. This was much more than marital infidelity. It was a crime. And Jason, with a tense look, told me, "She's involved in something big. And Timothy is being used." I felt the world spin. Even with all the anger I carried, the idea that Timothy was just a pawn in a larger game took my breath away. Jason explained that for months he had tried to warn his brother, but had been cut out of Christine's life. She saw him as a threat, and with good reason. "She manipulates people as easily as she breathes," he said. And I, for a moment, saw my reflection in his words. Despite the tension, there was something there that drew me in. Not because of Jason himself, but because of the feeling that, for the first time, someone was fighting by my side, even if he came from the other side. Our alliance was fragile, uncomfortable, but necessary. And every document he handed me was a step towards the truth. Christine is not who you think. We decided to build a dossier. I combined the evidence I had found with the files Jason had brought. Our plan was simple and daring. Expose Christine publicly. Not just for revenge, but to prevent her from destroying other lives. We sat together for hours, sketching timelines, connecting names, tracing financial paths. It was strange how the work united us. Like two survivors of the same shipwreck. During those days, I saw a side of myself that had been dormant. Analytical, focused, determined. Jason didn't ask about my pain. He just respected my space. In silence, we created a trench made of evidence and indignation. Bruno, always nearby, seemed to sense that something important was underway. At night, as I organized folders, I felt less lonely. Over time, the conversations between Jason and me ceased to be just strategic. He shared fragments of his history with Christine, childhood traumas, the guilt for not having stopped her sooner. Little by little, I shared my losses, my disappointments. There were no promises or forced intimacies. Just a growing respect between two broken, but not defeated people. If I was going to fall again, at least it would be standing. It took me days to gather the courage, but I knew I needed to face Janet. Timothy's mother had always been a cold presence in my life. Traditional, distant, often condescending. But something told me that hiding what was happening from her would be a mistake. I called and arranged a meeting. When I arrived at her house, I brought a copy of the dossier with me and a guarded heart. Not to attack, but to survive. Janet greeted me with her usual neutral expression, but her eyes betrayed surprise at seeing me. I sat on the living room sofa where so many loveless Christmases had passed and went straight to the point. I told her about the note, about Paris, about Christine and the stolen inheritance. She didn't interrupt me once. She just listened with her hands clasped in her lap. When I finished, I placed the envelope with the documents on the table. She looked at it for a few seconds, then turned her eyes back to me. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. I took a deep breath, facing that woman I had once tried to please in vain. "I didn't come to ask for anything, Janet. I came to warn you. Your son is not just unfaithful. He is an accomplice in something much bigger. And I will act." She didn't respond, but for the first time she didn't look away. "I didn't come to ask for anything. I came to warn you." 2 days later, I received an unexpected call. It was Janet. She asked to meet again, but in a neutral location. A downtown coffee shop. I arrived with the same caution as before, but this time I noticed a difference. She was serious, yes, but there was something restless about her demeanor. Without beating around the bush, she said, "I confronted Timothy." My breath hitched for a second. Janet said she showed him the documents, confronted him with the facts, and heard him try to justify himself with the same smooth talk I knew so well. But she wasn't fooled. For the first time, Janet saw her son as a man, not a spoiled boy. And the judgment was clear. "He doesn't deserve the woman he left," she said with a firmness that moved me. Those words came as an unexpected balm. Not for the compliment, but for the recognition. After so many years of feeling invisible in her eyes, Janet finally saw. And more than that, she chose the right side of the story. Not for me, but for the truth. That changed something between us. Something I never imagined possible. "You don't deserve the woman you left." Janet surprised me by offering legal help. She said she had contacts, experience, and no longer wanted to condone her own son's lies. I was silent for a few seconds, absorbing the weight of that proposal. She wasn't an emotional woman. Her gesture came from reason, from justice, and perhaps from an old guilt she was trying to correct. I accepted, because I knew that, alone, the fight would be harder. The conversation continued with more openness than I imagined. She spoke about the husband who never respected her, about how she raised Timothy to survive, not to love. For the first time, Janet showed herself to be human to me. Not as a mother-in-law, not as an enemy, but as a woman. Our eyes met in a silent recognition. Pain was also a common language. As we said goodbye, she held my hand with unexpected strength. "If I can make amends for some of this, I want to try," she said. There was no emotion in her voice, but there was truth. And at that moment that was enough. We didn't need to be close. Just to be on the same side of the fight. And now finally we were. It's never too late to change sides. I gathered Joshua and Deborah in my living room with a mixture of relief and tension. I spread the documents on the table and recounted, in detail, everything I had discovered. From the apartment to Janet's call and Jason's unexpected support. They listened attentively, eyes fixed on each paper, each sentence. When I finished, Deborah was the first to react. "You're digging deep, Kath. And you're doing it right." Joshua looked at me with a silent pride, different from any I had ever received. He didn't need to say much. His support was always constant, firm, discreet. Deborah, more direct, was already talking about strategy, press contacts, possible dates to make everything public. For the first time, I felt a safe network around me. They weren't just listening. They were with me. There, at that table surrounded by evidence and memories, we built something greater than a denunciation. We built trust. They didn't question my motivations. They didn't doubt my strength. They simply offered me what they had, loyalty. And that, at that moment, was the most powerful weapon I could carry. "We're with you until the end." It was Deborah who brought the most surprising news. Through an acquaintance in the legal sector, she discovered that Christine was being investigated for fraud in public contracts. Her company, used as a front, was involved in money laundering schemes, and Timothy, even without knowing it, was the name linked to the transactions. The confirmation of everything Jason had insinuated dropped like a bomb in the center of the room. I was paralyzed for an instant. I had imagined many things, but not that he was so deep in that trap. Timothy was not just a traitor. He was a stooge. A pawn in the game of a woman who knew exactly where she was stepping. Part of me felt pity, but it was just an old reflex. The other part, the one that was reborn, felt only indignation. Joshua was the one who summarized it clearly. If she falls, he goes down with her. And, at that moment, I understood that my personal pain was now part of something much bigger. There were other victims, other hidden truths. I couldn't go back now. The exposure would not just be an act of courage, it would be a duty. If she falls, he goes down with her. We scheduled the meeting for the following week. Jason would secure the complementary evidence. Janet would ensure the presence of important names from the school board and the city council, where Christine held suspicious contracts. I would take care of the presentation, line by line, document by document. There would be no room for doubt. The truth would be exposed before everyone, with clarity and dignity. At night, I sat in front of the mirror with a notebook on my lap. I sketched what I intended to say. The words came laden with pain, but also with firmness. I was no longer a woman begging for respect. I was someone demanding justice. I knew it would be difficult, that there would be judging glances, perhaps even attempts to discredit me. But I also knew I had come too far to back down. On the last line of my note, I wrote in large letters, "Truth is not revenge." And I repeated it to myself like a mantra. With each passing day, my courage took shape, my fear shrank. I didn't have all the answers, but I had evidence, allies, and a story that needed to be heard. The time had come. It will be their end. Or mine. On the eve of the meeting, the weight of the choices fell upon me with full force. I woke up with a tight heart, trembling hands, and my mind filled with doubts. What if everything went wrong? What if no one believed me? The courage that had been growing in me seemed to evaporate before the possibility of failure. I sat on the kitchen floor, with a cup of tea in my hands, trying to find firmness amidst the internal chaos. Voices from the past began to haunt me. I remembered the times Timothy made me doubt myself, Janet's past glances, the silences I had to swallow. It was as if all the ghosts decided to visit me together that morning. I felt like disappearing, canceling everything, becoming invisible again. The pain of being seen, judged, exposed. It was almost unbearable. I closed my eyes and tried to breathe deeply, but each breath seemed to pull memories instead of air. I cried in silence, clinging to the dog, feeling my strength drain away. Why do this? Why expose myself so much? Why, of all people, did I have to carry this burden? It was then that, almost in a whisper, a question escaped my lips. What if I'm making a mistake? It was Jason who appeared in the afternoon, as if he sensed my breakdown. He brought coffee and silence, two things I needed more than advice. He sat beside me on the sofa and for a few minutes said nothing. Then in a low voice he said, "It's normal to be afraid before doing the right thing." That touched me more than any speech. For the first time, someone validated my fear without diminishing my courage. I shared with him my doubts, my insecurities, the fear of not being heard. He listened to me as always, attentive, unhurried. Then he turned to me with a disarming serenity and said, "You've already won. Just by being here. Just by not having kept silent." I felt my eyes fill with tears, but it wasn't sadness, it was gratitude. For the company. For the comfort. Jason didn't try to fix me. He just reminded me how far I had already come. How much I had rebuilt myself since that note on the bed. And at that moment, even still afraid, I realized I was no longer alone. My war was mine, yes, but there were hands beside me, ready to support me if I fell. You've already won. Just by being here. At the end of the day, a letter arrived in the mail with no sender. The envelope, however, was familiar. I recognized the handwriting even before opening it. It was from Timothy. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I touched the paper. My instinct was to throw it away, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened it with trembling hands and read, paragraph by paragraph, every attempt to justify the unjustifiable. He spoke of regret, of moments that meant nothing, of having been confused by Christine. He said he thought of me every day, that no one knew him like I did. Each sentence was an attempt to salvage an old guilt, to rekindle something he himself destroyed. At the end, a disguised plea. "Don't make this public. We can resolve it between us." The same game. The same pattern. I folded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope. I felt anger, but more than that I felt clarity. He still thought I was fragile. He still believed he could manipulate me with pretty words. That a simple "I'm sorry" would silence me. But he didn't know that Catherine no longer existed. He still thought he could break me with words. The school meeting room was full. Tables rearranged, chairs occupied by familiar faces, co-workers, board members, parents of students, and, discreetly in the back, Janet and Jason. Joshua and Deborah stood beside me. I felt sweat trickling down my back, my heart beating like an erratic drum in my chest. There was a tense quiet in the air, as if everyone sensed that something important was about to happen. Christine entered first, elegant as always, trying to maintain an air of superiority. Timothy followed right behind, visibly uncomfortable. Our eyes met for a brief second. I didn't look away. The principal opened the session formally, but as soon as I stood up and asked for the floor, the atmosphere changed. I walked to the center of the room with the folder in my hands. I took a deep breath. And I began. I presented the documents with firmness. I spoke of the accounts, the fake contracts, the forged signatures. I pointed out every connection between Christine, her company, and the funds diverted from the school. I displayed the copies, the printouts, the bank records. Finally, I placed a small audio recording in the center of the table. A conversation between Christine and a supplier sent by Jason. The silence was absolute. "It's all recorded." The recording was the missing explosion. Christine's voice, cold and confident, negotiating illicit contracts, came through clear as day. The reactions were instantaneous, whispers, shocked glances, board members exchanging words in low tones. Timothy, realizing the content, turned pale. Janet closed her eyes for a second. Jason, firm in the background, just watched. The fall had begun, and there was no stopping it. Timothy's name appeared in documents signed by him, even without knowledge of the crimes. But the law does not forgive accomplice innocence. The financial connections between him and Christine were recorded. The involvement was undeniable. Christine tried to intervene, to say something, but was interrupted. The principal asked for silence. The board president stood up and declared with a trembling voice, "These allegations will be forwarded to the authorities immediately." Christine's mask began to crumble. For the first time I saw panic on her face. Timothy, stunned, bowed his head, as if only then understanding the gravity of the situation. The shield of charm and manipulation had been ripped away. The truth, raw and unadorned, asserted itself before them like a broken mirror. Impossible to mend. They had nowhere to run. I stood up once more. My hands no longer trembled. My voice did not falter. I looked at everyone there, colleagues who doubted, friends who believed, curious or incredulous faces, and said, This is not just my story. It is a warning. An end. A choice not to remain silent. I spoke of dignity, of justice, of how truth, when well supported, is stronger than any well-told lie. I finished with a request. That this school would never condone corruption, that the women in that room would never doubt themselves because of abandonment, and that no one there would forget what they had just witnessed. The silence was replaced by murmurs of support, discreet nods, teary eyes. Joshua squeezed my hand. Deborah hugged me. Janet from a distance nodded her head. I looked at Timothy one last time. He seemed smaller than I remembered. There was no more anger in me, only an emptiness that, little by little, was being filled by something stronger. Peace. I gathered my things, held the envelope with the remaining documents, and walked towards the door with firm steps. No one stopped me, and this time I was the one who walked out the door. Months after the public exposure, I returned to the library where it all began. The same silent space, the smell of books, the shelves that had so often comforted me on sad days. But now something was different. I was no longer there just as an employee. I was there as the founder of a new project. I created Between the Lines, a book club for women who, like me, had been left behind, silenced, forgotten, but never defeated. At the first meeting, only 5 women came. Each carried a familiar weight in their eyes. We started shyly, reading excerpts from novels, but soon the books became bridges for real confessions. Tears flowed, laughter emerged. It was as if each story read brought courage to tell our own. Little by little, more women arrived. And without realizing it, I created a community where pain transformed into healing. The library, once cold, gained color. The shelves became witnesses to silent rebirths. It was moving to see them finding their voice, strength, meaning. And as we shared chapters of fiction, we wrote, unknowingly, real chapters of overcoming. I was no longer just Catherine, the betrayed woman. I was a bridge. You are not alone. Jason started visiting the club frequently, always respectful, always in the corner of the room, listening more than talking. After the meetings, he would walk me home, and gradually our silences became comfortable. There was no rush, no need to explain. It was a kind of presence that didn't demand, it just offered. And after everything, that was rare and precious. We started having coffee on Saturdays. Brief outings without labels, without expectations. We talked about books, about life, about the pains that shaped us. Jason never tried to save me. On the contrary, he let me grow at my own pace, celebrating every small victory as if it were his own. There were no promises between us, just space. With him, I relearned to trust in lightness. I discovered that life doesn't need to restart with a romance, but that true friendship can be the fertile ground for any new beginning. And if any feeling bloomed from there, let it be natural, honest. For the first time, I didn't feel afraid to be with someone. And no urgency either. I don't need a savior. But I enjoy company. One evening, I sat alone on the porch with a cup of tea and Bruno by my side. I looked up at the sky and noticed something strange: silence. But not the suffocating silence of loneliness, rather the silence of peace. That kind of calm that arrives slowly, like a breath after a storm. I took a deep breath and for the first time in a long time smiled without pain. The memories still existed. The scars too. But they no longer hurt as before. They were marks that told my story, not open wounds. I had faced abandonment, betrayal, judgment, and yet I remained. Not only did I remain, but I flourished. Among books, bonds, and discoveries, I rebuilt something Timothy could never destroy: my self-love. Life continued without promises of perfection. But now I knew how to handle it. I knew how to be enough for myself. I knew how to look back without losing myself. And, above all, I knew how to recognize who I had become. Catherine Adams was no longer just a forgotten librarian in an unhappy marriage. She was a whole woman. I was no longer the same woman. I was better. It was late afternoon, and the sun filtered through the garden trees with a softness that seemed to embrace everything. I sat in the old rocking chair with a book on my lap and my bare feet touching the grass. Bruno lay beside me, as he always did, his head on my leg. He had aged a bit. His fur was starting to lighten and his steps were slower. But he was still there. Always there. Looking at him brought a peace that no words could reach. He had witnessed everything. The sleepless nights, the silent tears, the first timid laughs after the pain. While many left or doubted, Bruno remained. In his silent loyalty, I found a kind of love that demands nothing, only presence. And perhaps that's why he was my safest harbor. I would read aloud sometimes just to hear him breathe deeper. It was almost as if he understood. As if every word spoken was, in some way, for both of us. He was no longer just a dog left by a man. He was a journey companion. A symbol of everything that resisted and flourished. He never left me. In the third week of the club, a new woman appeared. Her name was Clara. She carried a weight on her shoulders that her eyes could not hide. She sat in silence just listening, but one look was enough for me to recognize. There was the same shadow that once inhabited me on that pale face. I didn't need to ask. She saw me as I was. And without knowing it, she saw herself too. After the meeting, she stayed last. She came close, hesitant, and said, "You don't know me. But you told my story." I felt a lump in my throat. I offered a hug, and she accepted it like someone collapsing from within. At that moment, I understood the true purpose of everything I had lived. It wasn't just about justice. It was about shared healing. About being a mirror and an outstretched hand for other women. I accompanied Clara to the following meetings. Gradually, her posture changed. Her voice gained firmness. She started smiling again. And so did I. In every woman who passed through that room, something in me was restored. The cycle of pain turned into a circle of affection. My story now served as a seed for other reconstructions. I saw in their eyes the same pain I once had. Today, when I look in the mirror, I no longer seek approval, nor promises of eternal love. I seek truth. And I see someone who learned to love herself with all the cracks that time left. Someone who chose not to be a victim, but a protagonist. Self-love didn't come like a lightning bolt, nor like a motivational speech. Came slowly, in silence, in resistance, in new beginnings. I learned that loving is not losing yourself in another. It is finding yourself, even when everything falls apart. That losses can open space for firmer roots. That betrayals can teach the value of your own word. That solitude can sometimes be the cradle of freedom. And mainly that starting over is never a sign of weakness. It is the greatest form of courage. Now the past doesn't hurt me, teaches me. And every scar is a reminder that I survived what I thought would kill me. I walk with lightness, speak with clarity, feel with wholeness. If one day I ask myself why all that happened, today I answer with serenity. It was not punishment. It was transition. It was rebirth. Perhaps he left me with what I needed most, myself. Now, I'm curious about you who heard my story. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Have you gone through something similar? Support the channel, subscribe, like, comment, and share this video. I'm leaving another story on the final screen that you will also like. And it will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.